Thanks everyone for coming. This is a great venue here for showing a film, and I'm glad to be down here in the Orlando area. As it says here, I'm a wildlife ecologist. It's my job to study wild animals in wild places. It's a great job, no doubt about it. A lot of that is related to conservation ecology. Conservation ecology is saving endangered species. I spend a whole bunch of time in China looking at giant pandas, and everyone wants to know about my giant panda work. But in reality, most of the work we do is more about people than about wildlife. Human-wildlife conflicts are what most of these animals are having problems with. If we want to keep wild animals in wild places, we usually have to deal with the people as much as the animals. There aren't too many human-wildlife conflicts with giant pandas. Everybody's on board, save the pandas. But there's a bear that lives in the same forest as those giant pandas. This is an Asiatic black bear, probably the least loved animal in China. The reason is because they love the things that people love. They are really good at eating corn. They're really good at destroying honey hives. And they are probably the bane of every farmer living around these reserves. So a reserve is trying to save these animals at the same time that the people are fighting against these animals. And that's the kind of thing that scientists like me deal with. How can we find a way that those two, humans and these bears, can coexist? Don't worry about the pandas. Worry about the Asiatic black bears. A lot of what we're doing, I didn't see myself go forward there. Their issues come from that crop damage, but the issues also come from the restaurant trade. You can still buy bear steaks in the restaurants. You can buy gallbladder in the pharmacy. Their bladder is part of, their bile is part of traditional medicine. All of that creates a market for bears and gives people incentive to kill the bears in addition to their wildlife damage. So we spend a lot of times just finding out what are people's issues with bears. I have a team going around interviewing people who are living with the bears on where do these conflicts occur, why do these conflicts occur, how do they think of solutions for these bears. The solutions are usually not good. 54% of them are telling us they tolerate. I doubt that. I think very few of them actually tolerate. I think their main response is the poisoning or complaining to the government. Very few of them are using alternate means. They don't use guard dogs around their farms the way some of the ranchers here do. They don't, you can put fires around during the crop harvest time to keep the bears away. There are non-lethal means for protecting these farms that the farmers are not aware of yet and don't utilize. Part of the reason they don't utilize is because the government does not support any amelioration of this problem. The government considers this a farmer problem and not their problem. So we have to work also with the government. You need to repay these people who have damage. They're living in a reserve that you're protecting these bears. They need some money back if their crops are destroyed. And you need to provide them with a way to combat these bear issues. So that's one avenue of work that we're on. A separate avenue with a separate set of problems and solutions has to do with Borneo. I'm working at a mountain site in Borneo that is a drop-dead gorgeous site. Orangutans, sun bears, clouded leopards, pangolins, trees that 5 people can't wrap their arms around. A great place. That place includes indigenous people. And those indigenous people have lived in that forest pretty much forever. But now that it's a protected area, the government's worried about those people. How are they going to keep pangolins with these people in there? How are they going to keep orangutans with these people in there? So we're in there looking at what is the impact of these indigenous people on the wildlife, and are they coexisting with that wildlife or not? For these Eban people, they primarily like pig. They eat pig every day of the week. They hunt pigs, they gather pigs, they celebrate pigs. That pig harvest, as far as we can tell, pigs are still the most abundant animal in that forest. They're not having any impact on the pigs. The farmers have, the hunters have agreed to wear track loggers, and we follow them. There are tracks around in the forest, and where they go, there is still wildlife. They're just looking for the pigs. So in this case, we can tell the government, as far as we can tell, these people are living in conjunction with the wildlife, and you don't have to worry about translocating these people or coming down on these people for their impacts. That's a nice story. I've spent a good part of my career looking at deer in Asia. There's a bunch of deer species in Asia, just like we have white-tailed deer here. There are different deer species in most of the Asian countries. All of those species are in trouble, primarily because they taste good. Two of these species have gone extinct, the Schomburgk's deer and the Pure David's deer, although the Chinese have reintroduced Pure David into a park. For the most part, a lot of these deer are on the edge of being at least endangered. If you want to understand deer conservation, there are 4 keys to deer conservation: habitat, 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 and protection. You've got to have the right habitat. Without the right habitat, you're not going to have the deer. So if you're going to do deer conservation, you're essentially doing habitat conservation. Yes, you have to prevent poaching, but poaching is usually not as big an issue as you would think. It's habitat. Can you keep that habitat that people ultimately want to use? I work in Myanmar for the most part, although I've been to all the Southeast Asian countries and worked in all of them. In Myanmar, the problems are the forest that these deer live in makes a great rice paddy. And with increasing human densities, all these forests are being cut down and turned into rice production. The government's trying to make money legally. The way they want to make money legally is increase their rice production. Rice production means no forest means no deer. That issue is a continuing saga in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Thailand. Their forest is already gone that these deer used to like. That's an issue in Southeast Asia. Are we solving that issue? Not really. We really haven't been able to turn any of this around. What we have been able to do is work on capacity building of the young conservationists in these countries. We've educated and trained a lot of folks who are now impassioned about these deer. We're hoping they can turn things around. For our part, we really don't have control over outside governments, but we have the ability to enable and facilitate the work of the in-country folks. And all we can do is hope that does the thing. This is an example of some of the resources. People are not running out and killing these deer. What they're doing is they're using the habitat in ways that they've used it for 1,000 years. But now, instead of having 100 people live in the forest, you have 1,000 people living in the forest. And 1,000 people can't live the same way 100 people lived. That's the problem we're having throughout the world, that the density of people is overwhelming those traditional practices that used to work well. I'm going to end, I don't want to keep us away from Grizzly Man here. I'm going to end with this last example. I don't want you to think that all conservation happens overseas in the developing world, happens with Westerners coming in and telling indigenous people what to do. We have issues here in the United States. Here's one situation that we're working with in Montana. A group of donors, a group of conservationists have bought over 400,000 acres of grassland prairie in Montana. It's an amazing situation. This grassland prairie that we have in the United States is globally important. Most of it's been removed and turned into farmland, but there are still patches of it left in Montana and North Dakota and a little bit in Wyoming. This is a great place to work with a lot of wildlife communities. When Lewis and Clark went through this area, they saw herds of animals that are the equivalent of the Serengeti. They would look out over a visa and see buffalo and pronghorn, elk, and grizzly bears, and cougars, and wolves, all in the same environment. That really doesn't exist anymore. The grassland is still there, but those mammals have been removed. So we're trying to work with American Prairie Reserve to bring back some of these animals. Reintroduction of the bison. Swift fox is a small carnivore that's been removed. We can reintroduce swift fox. We can bring back the black-footed ferret, which lives on prairie dog towns. Simple thing there is don't shoot your prairie dogs. Let those prairie dog towns grow up, and then you can put the black-footed ferret in there. All of this, from a conservation point of view, are noble goals and noble aims. It's really not going over well with the local community. It really is a source of conflict between American Prairie Reserve and the local ranching communities. They see the import of these bison as destroying their way of life, their ranching community. And a lot of this human-wildlife conflict is now happening not between indigenous people and the government. It's happening between two sets of people, the local community and this outside NGO that is trying to restore something that was originally there. This is the kind of thing the Smithsonian works on. We work on the idea that everything works better with knowledge. Bring knowledge to the situation, bring science to the situation, and with that information, you can work to some solution. So we're not really the grizzly man philosophy. I don't go and live with pandas. I don't even know if I would want to go live with pandas. But I do come to understand pandas, and with that understanding, I inform both the local communities and the government on how best to go about living with these animals. So that's all. I want to let you get to the movie. That's all I have to say. I'll be around after the movie if anybody wants to talk to me. But thank you all for coming, and enjoy the show.